Welcome back, Myrmidons. Here is a sweet bonus episode of Greek Mythology Retold podcast. It is focusing on Queen Hecuba and King Priam of Troy, and I know that you are awaiting the full-blown episode of Greek Mythology Retold podcast, and I have to tell you, it is on its way. It is an in-depth look at Thetis, Achilles' mother. A bit of news before we dive into the ancient world of myth and the Trojan War. For those of you who also read the Homeric Chronicles, book number 3, Rage of Queens, just came out actually on Valentine's Day, just in time to break your heart. It is ready to take you into the final days of Troy and the Trojan War. As a reminder, this book series is an adult retelling of the Trojan War. It is meant for mature readers. This podcast, Greek Mythology Retold, is however dedicated to all the ages. You can join me over at Supercast in one easy click for ad-free and early access to all my episodes, as well as bonus episodes and deep dives into the articles, essays, and books that I've read and studied about the Trojan War. This is a great way to discover and explore the academic discussion on the Trojan War and Greek mythology in your busy day. The subscription also includes the sound effects versions of the Homeric Chronicles as I crank them out. I probably will not put my books on Audible. I think I just enjoy doing the reading and the podcasting myself. So the sound effects versions of the Homeric Chronicles as they come out will be put on my subscription feed only. Stay tuned at the end of this bonus episode for a preview of the 2-part deep dive into Dr. Casey Dewey Hackney's essay, Mothers in Arms, Soldiers' Emotional Bonds, and Homeric Similes. This essay was a pivotal piece for me in understanding Achilles in a military light. Okay, without further ado, Myrmidons, here is your bonus episode on Hecuba and Priam. I just want to share with you the research that I'm doing and some of the conclusions I'm coming to as I'm writing this series. The first person right now that I want to talk about is Hecuba, and she is the queen of Troy. She is the second wife to Priam. We don't know a lot about his first wife, but she is the second wife, and she is the mother of 19 of his children. We're told in Homer via Priam that he had 50 children. He had 50 sons anyway. That's not including daughters, so that's more than 50, right? So it's 50 sons. But 19 of the children that he mentions are from the same woman. That's because the rest of the kids are coming from various other wives, concubines, throughout the Troad. Anyway, Hecuba is the queen that we know about. She's pretty pivotal because the prophecy that sort of sets in motion the Trojan War is something she literally gives birth to. Yet we don't see her represented in a very big way in the Iliad, and we don't see her represented in a really big way in motion pictures either. A lot of people like the movie Troy with Brad Pitt in 2004. And you know what? It's visually a very stunning movie, and I like it for that. However, for me, leaving the gods out and the movie was so short, I just feel like it would be trying to stick Game of Thrones into like a trilogy, which would be impossible. So I feel like that's kind of where the movie Troy sits for me. There's so many things that are left out, and they amalgamate certain characters into one character, and I don't know. Like Briseis, for example, she's sort of Briseis and Chryseis / Astynomé / yeah, so I don't know. Anyway, but the point is, Hecuba's not even a character in that movie. Priam figures very, Peter O'Toole. Like you can't miss him on screen. But where's the wife? Where's the mother? Where's Hecuba? We don't see her. In Troy Fall of a City, we see her. She's played by Frances O'Connor. And I feel like that was really well cast. I really liked her as Hecuba because she's sort of, and the older woman, middle age, like me. And she's still raising kids. She's very active, an active mother. So anyway, we have that. And so let's just look at that for a second. So she is Priam's second wife and the mother of the Prince of Troy, Hector. So the son who is the crown prince is Hector. We see a lot of things about Hector, and he's this amazing fighter. He's the defender of the citadel. He is the protector of the city, the prince of the city. And so he has a really, in the Iliad, he has, I think, probably a really good relationship with his mother. And I conclude that from where we get to the end. So I'll get there. And then we have Paris. Paris is the complicated son. Paris is the baby that she was carrying when she received the prophecy that if this child was born, he would mean the death or the doom of Troy. So she had this vision that she basically gave birth to a burning log, and then it was interpreted to mean it was a bad omen for this child and for the city. And that's why Priam and she had to make that really painful decision to set the baby out for exposure. And when I look at Hecuba, I think about that as a mother. So you have this prophecy that says that the child that you're carrying and you're going to give birth to is going to destroy the city that you live in. Ugh, what do you do with that? Like, that's your baby. I think that as a mother, that would be really difficult, and even as a father. Now a king is a king. As a king and queen, you sort of have a different responsibility to the people that you're governing over. And I think that as Hecuba, as the mother, and it's supposedly her second child, I just feel that she would have been very reluctant to let this child go. And even if she knew she had to let this child go, the fact that somebody's got to put their foot down and make it happen. And so Priam is the one that takes this child away from her and gives it to the shepherd and says, Aglaus, take this baby out and make sure that it dies. I feel like a couple of things. Number one, Hector's going to be old enough probably to remember something bad happened. And he's going to grow up with a mother who is burdened by that kind of grief. So Hector's experience with and relationship with his mother, I don't think it can help but revolve around that in some way. I think also that that's going to affect Hecuba's relationship with Priam. And that's where I feel that Troy Fall of a City kind of, had an opportunity to take it in a certain way, and then they didn't. They really made in that show, they really made it that Priam was more upset about what happened to Paris, that they had to give him away, or not give him away, but expose him out there to die than she did. And I felt like she was the one more or less consoling him. I just really feel it should be humanistically the other way around. There's something different as the mother who gives birth to a child. So as a writer, that's the vein that I took. So those are things to consider when you think about Hector perhaps being a real person, or Hecuba or Priam if they were real human beings. And I sort of go with Barry Strauss's analysis, where he says that even in oral tradition, if you want to think about something, an oral tradition that's based on something, and what's easier to remember in an oral history that becomes mythology than names. So surely the names existed and at one point were attached to real people. And over the course of time, what they did and etc. was embellished, or maybe pieces of their story are forgotten. So I try to look at the characters humanistically like that. And as humans, we have a whole wide range of things that we experience and emotions that we have. And not every person's going to feel the same way about a specific kind of event, but we are certainly free to interpret that. So I take Hecuba and her relationship with Priam, and I see there was probably a really positive relationship and good. And that after this event with Paris, where they had to take their second son and expose him to the elements to die, I feel like that probably fractured the relationship a little bit. I think that's probably a realistic idea that could face any married couple, right? Losing a child could create a tremendous amount of grief that a couple may or may not be able to work through. Now, in the ancient world, she's not able to just like go away. She has to stay immersed in that grief and in that loss and in the place. She didn't have a choice but to stay in the palace where her son has been literally ripped from her breast. So that's the Hecuba that I sort of look for and see. And now it makes sense to me, because when I get to the end of the Iliad, and this is why it's sad that Troy Fell of a City didn't include this scene, and why it's sad that the movie Troy didn't include it. In my books, however, I do include it, because I feel like it's pivotal to who she is as a character, her relationship to the city of Troy, her relationship to her children, and her relationship to her husband, Priam.
And as promised, a sneak peek at my discussion of Dr. Casey Dewey Hackney's paper on mothering similes used in the Homeric text. Welcome, Elite Myrmidons, to the first ever deep dive episode for Greek Mythology Retold. In these episodes, I will take you into the meat and bones, the heart and soul of individual essays, articles, and books I've researched on Greek mythology and the Trojan War for my book series and the Greek Mythology Retold podcast. If you love Greek myth and the Trojan War, you're in the right place. To christen this venture, I begin with something that profoundly affected my point of view of the Trojan War and Achilles. Everyone wants to know about Achilles, and the question most often discussed on the boards and on social media platforms, especially since Madeline Miller's book, The Song of Achilles, was published a decade ago, is, were Achilles and Patroclus lovers? Personally, I don't think so. But in saying that, I would also add that I didn't always think that. After I read Song of Achilles, I thought, it really could be. But after continued reading and researching for my own projects, I changed my mind from that first thought. And it's important to remember, I think, that with mythology, we're going to have a variety of interpretations, especially over time and depending on the sources that you consult and the society and culture that the sources are coming from. All of those things influence whatever a final interpretation would be, including, how I interpret it or how I came to interpret it myself. And really that myths are malleable. They are not set in stone, and there is no really one right or wrong way to interpret events or situations where there is no clear-cut, explicit explanation for something, right? So just keep that in mind. I took the more militaristic approach, and let me explain. That brings me to Dr. Dewey's essay and Dr. Shea's book, Achilles in Vietnam. But this deep dive is really going to be focusing on Dr. Casey Dewey Hackney's essay. This work made me step back and think about Achilles in a military capacity, his role as a military leader, and the responsibilities and bonds that would have developed because of that. By ignoring this layer, we are in fact stripping Achilles of what and who he primarily was a combat veteran, a warrior. And by looking at Achilles and his relationship with Patroclus through the hyper-focused lens of his sexuality was, for me in the end, much more limiting than revelatory. This is part 1 of 2, as we deep dive into Dr. Casey Dewey Hackney and Dr. Mary Ebbitt's essay, Mother in Arms, Soldiers, Emotional Bonds, and Homeric Similes. I've mentioned this paper in a few Greek Mythology Retold podcasts, but now we're going to go all in. Dr. Dewey is the program director for classical studies at the University of Houston. She earned her PhD at Harvard University in 2001. Her recent publications on Homer are of particular interest to me, namely the essay on the Homeric multitext, Achilles Unbound, and her Homeric variations on a lament by Briseis. But this work on the mothering bonds of soldiers and Homeric similes is amazing. It really blew me away and had a profound effect on how I developed Achilles as a character and his relationship with Patroclus. She begins with the modern soldier, an interview on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, whose guest was Sergeant First Class Leroy Petrie. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor for what he'd done in Afghanistan. In the interview, Sergeant Petrie said, quote, "We are all brothers out there." And he said he'd never give up on any of his men, that he felt about his men the way a bird caring for its young feels. What I find interesting here is the comparison that Sergeant Petrie makes is one of a parental role, even though he uses the familial term of brother. In the first section of Dr. Dewey's essay titled Achilles and the Mother Bird Reconsidered, she outlines how and why the simile of the mother bird is relevant to Achilles and the relationship he has with Patroclus and his myrmidons. In Book 9 of the Iliad, Achilles makes a comparison between himself and a mother bird, which is very similar to the way Sergeant Petrie describes his feelings toward his men. By Book 9, Agamemnon has already taken Briseis, and Achilles feels betrayed and humiliated, and the Greeks are losing and they want Achilles back in the fight. His response in Book 9, lines 323 through 326 is this: "Like a bird that brings food to her fledgling young in her bill whenever she finds any, even if she herself fares poorly, so I passed sleepless nights and many bloody days in battle, contending with men for the sake of their wives." This simile shows us that Achilles feels that his primary concern all these years has been for his men and not himself. Look at the simile. The mother bird brings back food even if she fares poorly. He's saying that he is taking care of his men even to the detriment of himself. He has suffered all these years, fighting for men because they had a home to return to. He's hinting that perhaps he doesn't, as he's not properly married, but is also reminding the Greeks of his feelings for Briseis because he says empathetically that she's the wife of his heart, and at the hands of Agamemnon, even a small comfort has been stripped from him, adding emotional pain to his humiliation. I also find it probable that this is a big dig at Agamemnon as well, because Achilles sees him as being selfishly motivated. Achilles is also reminding everyone he's sacrificed his sleep, has blood on his hands for the sake of everyone else, but not himself. Dewey points out that Achilles is drawing a parallel between the suffering of mothers and his suffering. She also points out that by using the mother bird imagery, Achilles is connecting his pain to that of mothers, which is ironic considering the pain he has caused by killing untold numbers of men, widowing and orphaning how many we have no idea. Dewey then talks about another mother bird and war grief connection in Euripides' play The Trojan Women. After Troy is sacked, the Trojan women are taken prisoner, and Hecuba, the former queen of Troy, speaks up about the wretched state of affairs that she finds herself in. She's basically a slave before Agamemnon's tents. She says, "Like some mother bird that over her fledgling screams, so I will lead off the shout. the song and dance, not the same as I had once conducted. Here is another reference to a grieving mother figure using the mother bird simile. Douay points out that the mother bird reference would have resonated with an ancient audience, and that Achilles' use of it would have been significant. Also, that in retrospect, she points out both modern and ancient soldiers used the same simile, so there must be a particular kind of bond between warriors that transcends time. By referencing a mother bird, it also conjures up the mother archetype to describe what soldiers feel in war, the bond relationship that they develop in battle. Douay makes a significant point here that Achilles and Sergeant Petrie are not quite in the same boat. Achilles is a prince who didn't take the oath of Tyndareus and actually was free to leave combat. He was free to withdraw from battle, and he threatened to go home, and if he did, there was really nothing Agamemnon could do about it. Agamemnon can't even force him to fight, hence the messengers back and forth begging Achilles, and later Patroclus. But Sergeant Petrie isn't free to leave. He's bound to remain in Afghanistan by contract. He doesn't have the luxury to say, "Fuck it, I'm out." Despite whatever hardships he and his men face, he has to remain for the duration. At this point, she brings in Jonathan Shea's book, Achilles in Vietnam, to begin making the strong correlation between soldiers across time. Homer alongside Shea's work with Vietnam vets. In his book, Shea talks about his work with veterans and the bonds they developed because of shared combat trauma and deprivations. He says, "The terror and privations of combat bonds men in a passion of care that the word brother only partly captures. Men become mothers to one another in combat. The grief and rage that they experience when a special comrade is killed appear virtually identical to that of a child suddenly orphaned, and they feel that the mother within them has died with the friend." And this got me to thinking. After 9 years of fighting together, the bond would be intense. That's like going through 9 tours of Vietnam or 9 tours in Afghanistan. So the question is, are these bonds sexual or emotional? And that's really what I focus on. The 2 reoccurring words used to describe the bond between soldiers is brother and mother. Both are familial, but reference very different family dynamics. Soldiers use the term brother, but they feel motherly. He suffers as he himself has caused suffering. Okay, that is the end of the first part of Dr. Douay's essay. If you'd like to hear more, click on part 2, and let's go Myrmidons. Please join us as a Myrmidon elite at greekmythologyretold.supercast.tech. Thank you so much for supporting my work. It is deeply, deeply appreciated. Thank you.